Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our latest webinar. This one's focused on digitization, application of AI, particularly in the supply chain space. For those that don't know our business, we are a talent solution provider helping clients access ex-consulting talent in a variety of ways, helping them from strategy formulation through to execution of projects. We do that via permanent executive search, via our independent consulting proposition, ex-consultants, high impact individual projects, and then via consulting solutions, allowing them to access teams. Part of the consulting solutions and our proposition there is we partner with specialized boutique consultancies in certain spaces. They provide access, or we provide access to our clients and give them access to the consulting services market in a much more agile, more SME, more focused, and ultimately more cost-effective way. One of those partners we have in this space is Mile 20. Mile 20 are a specialized consultancy within the supply chain space. I'm joined today, delighted to join today by our panelists, by Neil, by Mike. And by Mike, that won't get too confusing. But Neil, Mike, and Mike have a number of years, shall we say, of experience within this specific space, ranging from senior partner positions within consultancies through to senior leadership positions and operators within industries, a variety of different industries. So we're delighted to have them as a part of the panel today. And without further ado, we will move into some discussion. So we'll keep it hopefully fairly light, fairly conversation-based. And in terms of us and the reason why we're doing this, we've seen a huge amount more inquiries over the last few years around clearly AI and digital transformation, but particularly within the supply chain space. And there's a lot more inquiries from our clients around accessing talent who can provide them support within this space in particular. So hence the reason for the panel and discussion today. And I guess to kick us off, question to the panel first and foremost is, there's a lot of hype around this at the moment, a lot of inquiries we're seeing. Can companies really harness digital and see value through transformation of the supply chain in this way?
Yeah, great question, Ollie. So I guess it's no surprise that now more than ever, right, supply chain volatility is a kind of major topic for businesses. So issues such as materials availability, inflation that's impacting materials costs and transport costs, changing tariffs, ESG requirements or ESG not requirements. All you have to do is turn on the news every day and it's a topic, and it's putting supply chain at center stage to address this volatility and react and respond accordingly. So corporate businesses, they've been using this volatility to their advantage through technology solutions for several years now. So, you know, since COVID, it's been a major topic on the agenda. But I think specifically on this point, I'm just going to focus on the PE sector for a minute, because like I say, corporate businesses have been using this to their advantage for a number of years, but because of the timescales involved with implementing supply chain tech solutions, until recently, PE firms have treated supply chain as a function that they want to sort of optimize from a cost point of view. So the way they treat it is they set the inventory levels right, they get their network set up to achieve the right customer service that they want to achieve, and they reduce their supply chain costs as much as possible. So kind of a fix and forget approach, but they don't see it as or they haven't seen it as a significant lever for value creation within the kind of the ownership life cycle. However, now basically organizations have got the ability to implement supply chain tech solutions within that PE life cycle. So it's a lot faster than it used to be. So this kind of coupled with the major market volatility that we're experiencing has turned supply chain into a significant source of competitive advantage, not only for corporate businesses, but also for PE firms. And I feel like, you know, if PE firms aren't taking advantage of this, they're going to be missing out. So just to kind of bring that to life a bit, portfolio companies can So in my experience, I've worked with a number of these organizations over the years. So portfolio companies within a private equity offering can move their supply chain from maturity 1 to 2 on the sort of the Gartner maturity curve up to a 3 to 4 within timescales of like 1 to 2 years through tech enablement. So that's well within the ownership of the life cycle of a PE firm. So previously, this kind of thing would have taken 3 to 5 years or more to achieve. And this sort of supply chain maturity improvement makes portfolio companies a more appealing prospect to a potential buyer in the future. And so it can increase the multiple of that organization. So, for example, a buyer of a particular organization would value an agile supply chain that's powered by a leading APS solution, more highly than one that's powered by Excel and managed by tribal knowledge. So, you're set for success for the future. And additionally, the prospective buyer can also see a roadmap for kind of continuing to increase the supply chain maturity once they've taken ownership. And so continuing to reduce costs and optimize revenue and improve customer service, which generates additional value for the buyers. So in answer to your question, yes, it is a significant source of advantage, both for corporates and also for PE firms, and don't miss out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. We're certainly seeing more from the PE world than we previously have. Typically, it's been more from the sort of larger corporates in this space. So that makes loads of sense.
Yeah.
And Mike, bringing Mike, what would you say are the biggest sources of value companies can gain from supply chain tech transformations?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. I think on this one, it's easy to become quite bewildered with all of the technology, the digital capabilities, and all of the automation capabilities that are within the supply chain space that we see often in the media at the moment. But what really sets apart where the real value exists is actually a company by company decision. And ultimately, rather than picking what you see to be potentially the best use case, the best place to start first is really just looking at what are the key problems or opportunities that you're trying to solve with your business, irrespective of whether you know that there's any underlying technology solution that could exist today. And then from that, start to look at how you then potentially can figure out the best solution. And typically the best place to start is with your customer. Every company is looking to drive value through attracting and being competitive in the face of their customer. And typically, if you can find those problems or those opportunities or those cases where your customer really needs further support from you, that can create some really magical opportunities. And a great example that really highlights this is Amazon. Amazon, it's a technology company, right? But no, it's their mission is to be the Earth's most customer-centric business, and effectively they're using technology as a way of achieving that. And I think one of the great examples is in recent years we had the Amazon returns process that really was quite unknown up to that point in the industry, where returning something is as easy as purchasing. And that really shows how this digital solution came really from starting first from their business and their customer and trying to solve their challenges.
Thank you. And in terms of if you're running a business, you've got a load of different areas you can focus on, loads of different opportunities. How do you go about defining kind of the areas to kind of look at first and foremost?
Maybe I'll jump in on that one just to keep the flow going, Ollie, if that's okay. Well, listen, I think whilst we've got a supply chain centric audience with us today, it's important to recognize that AI technology opportunities are spanning the end-to-end value chain, and the real challenge isn't whether to do it, whether to adopt it, it is where to start. And the trick for me is to take a structured approach that brings the AI or technology in line with the long-term corporate goals, where you're heading in the future. So I guess 3 pointers from me on that. But it's not isolated to transformation within supply chain. Its adoption is going through, yes, demand planning, predictive analytics, finance, procurement, HR. One of the points Mike's made, a customer-centric approach. And to avoid fragmented efforts in what you choose to do, your use case, that are all going to be drawing on the same business internal resources, there has to be an alignment and a sequenced set of initiatives that a business chooses to create into a strategy. And in terms of looking at those opportunities, I tend to look at them through three lenses: the risk, value, and impact. And what I mean by that is, where can AI or technology reduce risk in the business? Where might it create the most value? And how do we manage the impacts? For example, ensuring we find ourselves talking about it today, AI-driven decision-making enhances and doesn't disrupt operations as we start to think about change management as well as the technology itself. And an approach I often use is the VMO, the Vision, Mission, and Outcomes documents, which really is a tool that forces board-level collaboration, kind of introduces balance to the outcomes that you're looking to achieve, and removes any bias from any individual use case project. As we know, for most of us on this particular call, like the genesis of a strategy for supply chain can come from IT. It can come from the supply chain team itself. It can come from finance, often does, or even commercial. And I guess most people on this call have played with the supply chain triangle over the years, which identifies the unintended consequences of a bias in one corner impacting another. And in reality, the VMO really forces, and it's a document I've used many, many times for this very reason, it forces vision-led, mission-driven, and outcome-focused transformation use cases. But it is intimidating, so having that funnel to walk through is a key priority.
And Neil, you look like you were going to add something in there.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that I'd add to that, Mike, is, organizations that are most successful in implementing supply chain tech are the ones that view the tech enablement not as a system implementation, but basically as an opportunity to transform and standardize the business processes and the ways of working, right? So as organizations move through the implementation journey, that's going to become clear to them. So for example, just to bring it to life, the blueprint design work that you have to go through is going to identify multiple processes that are non-standard and are not optimized across regions, across countries, and across business units. Organizations are going to find gaps, inconsistencies, issues with master data quality, and processes that are going to be highlighted and will need to be addressed. So, like I say, organizations that succeed in this see it as an opportunity to document and automate that tribal knowledge of the business. And I want to have on the team, you want to have kind of a good balance of legacy knowledge, how it's been done over the years, and future vision. So where we want to take the business in the future within that implementation team. And I think just a final point on this one, and I think we'll probably touch on this a bit later, but it's critical to make sure that the leadership team of the business understands the potential for the transformation and what the business case is, and they're driving and supporting their teams to deliver the change. So there's a number of different aspects of this you have to get right to make sure you succeed. And it is, as Mike says, it can be daunting, but there's a way of doing it in a structured way.
And the theme around this is around technology. Often, choice around technology is kind of critical for something like this. How do businesses, stakeholders go about selecting the right technology and vendor in this area?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ollie, we could literally do a 1-hour webinar on this topic alone, right? And I'm sure all the points that we're talking about, we could do a webinar on. So choosing the correct platform and implementation partner is critical, right? Obviously, but it can also be really complex. So I mean, I guess to bring this to life, the supply chain or the marketplace for supply chain tech continues to become increasingly complex. There's multiple categories that people will have heard of, like APS, advanced planning and scheduling, supply chain risk platforms. There's decision intelligence, there's data warehousing, and kind of with all these multiple vendors within each category and subcategory. So there are a few kind of specific points that organizations need to get right in order to make this a success and to kind of cut through all of this noise. So firstly, and this sounds obvious, but in many cases, organizations don't structure this well. They need to have a clearly defined RFI, RFP contracting phase that describes really clearly and specifically the business requirements, and it assesses the vendors against their functional capabilities, the costs of implementation, the support model that's offered after the implementation, what the implementation partners are going to be, and crucially, the cultural fit of the organization to yours. It sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't get this right in the first instance. So people falling down at the first hurdle.
And how do you, or you specifically, or Mile 20 more broadly, how would you support a business or a stakeholder through this?
So, I mean, we could come in and we can help people to structure and define what they're wanting from a business requirement point of view. We can help them to develop RFIs, RFPs. We can really help them to define the roadmap for change that they want to take the business on, and really get very specific on the scope, the functional requirements. We've got obviously a lot, I've been in this market for 20 years. I've got kind of a lot of knowledge around all the different partners and operators that exist in the marketplace. So we know what organization fits well to kind of or what supplier fits well to your organization, depending on the requirements, right? So there's a number of ways that we can help and we'll support, and I think we'll probably talk about that a bit more in detail later on. But I guess, sort of expanding on the answer as well. So failing to kind of define the end-to-end scope of what you're trying to achieve clearly and precisely can have a kind of significant impact on the end-to-end implementation costs and the SaaS costs. So you have to get that right, and it can be the difference between success and failure. So, for example, I've seen implementation costs vary by over 100% between two vendors for the same project scope, meaning one vendor was more than twice the price of another vendor to implement the same platform, and that's for a quite well-defined scope, right? So you have to be really, really clear on that, and we can help with that stuff. Also,
we've got a question from someone who's logged in.
Okay.
In terms
Sorry,
of your
I was on a roll, Ollie.
You were, yeah. I was going to cut you off. I think you might cover this anyway, so I just wanted to make sure it was covered. In terms of sort of, I think there's a recent project you're on at the moment, and sort of key lessons that you've learned from recent projects around balancing people, process, and systems within the sort of transformation journey.
So I'm not going to talk about specific projects that I'm working on at the moment, right? So that's, but so what specifically is the question?
I think getting the balance right, where you've chosen technology, or technology is the sort of key focus around it, but how do you balance the technology, the people, the process, in terms of the sort of full transformation piece that you're going to be leading?
Right. I mean, we are going to get into that in a bit, right? But I think it's a question of basically you have to. So there are three kind of key aspects that you have to get right. So first of all, you have to get this technology selection right, which is what we've just been talking about, and then within the implementation, as I said, organizations that make this a success are the ones that think of it as a transformation journey rather than a system implementation. Yeah. So you first of all have to make sure that you understand that and structure the team in the right way to achieve that. And then the other thing that you have to get right is really data. So you have to make sure that the input data that you've got is correct and it's being, is going into the system correctly, right? So there's a number of different aspects that have to be got right in order to do that, and it cuts across different, by implementing, we'll talk about this again as well probably later, but the implementation of technology means that the role of the individual who's doing the work, so the future of the way people are going to be working, is going to be subtly different. It's going to change as well, right? So you have to think about what does it mean for your people within the organization? How do you train them up? How do you upskill them? What do they need to be doing differently in the future, and how do you support them through that journey?
Yeah, I liked a lot the question, and I think a really important mindset to go into a technology-enabled transformation is to think about the technology as being the least important part of the change. And that's not probably strictly speaking the case, but it's a good mindset to have, because often there's a lot of excitement about this new technology and the functionality and what it will bring. But as the question sort of induced, a successful transformation has to be centered around ensuring that all of the different elements surrounding the technology all sing together to make sure that ultimately this really fundamentally changes the way that the organization and the company operates. So in particular, as we mentioned, process, skills, culture, all of these somehow need to complement the change that is going to be coming through with the technology itself.
And Mike Hegarty, in terms of your experience beyond the technology, to sort of build on what Neil and Mike have been saying, what else do you think is important in terms of delivering a successful transformation of this nature beyond the technology? What do you see as the key things that are important there?
Yeah, so listen, I've kind of picked out a few elements. It's funny, I've got a great example that I won't give that brings this very topic to life. Like one defining element of the thought that sets the timeline that then forces you to think about the people, the capability set, the culture change, how all that needs to play out around that timeline. So there is typically a definitive marker, if you want, that drives the rest of it. Well, listen, in terms of answering that question, I earlier introduced this concept of a VMO, a value chain approach, which prioritizes and sequences a series of technology use cases into a strategy. And with that alignment, and I kind of building on a picture here, you then take those outcomes that were agreed and convert them into a set of objectives. It's all about collaboration at the top before progressing anywhere, which builds on the point that we've all made. And a couple of examples of those objectives might be, for example, operational efficiency. Let's automate routine tasks and optimize some of our workflows, just to give an example from a recent program. Decision making. Let's leverage predictive analytics, if you're allowed to say it, to enhance forecasting, risk management, and resource allocation. But once you've got those objectives, great, okay, so what next? Well, you then need to convert them again to another layer of detail, which is the OKR approach, which is where you then take your objectives and say, well, how might that manifest itself in some of the key results that I want this to achieve? And if I kind of stick with giving some real world examples, you might set some specific time-bound results. As an example, again, lifting from a former project, let's reduce the order processing time by 30% using AI-driven automation in 12 months' time. Let's achieve a 95% predictive accuracy in our demand forecasting by Q4. Starting to bring definitive key results and time bounds for this piece of work that we're progressing before we've even got to the point of considering the technology or the solution. Well, the human aspect, as we start to bring in that element to it, building AI capabilities alongside humans, certainly at the outset, and is critical. So upskilling employees to work alongside AI tools, critical. Creating AI-powered decision support systems initially, rather than full automation. These are the factors that will allow you to engage the group of people that you're going to need, to a point that Neil made earlier on, those that lived and breathed it. How do you get this intimidating topic over the line with their engagement and support to the point where it proves itself to be beneficial to the business? And in later answers, I'll continue to build on that theme.
Okay, so just building on that, we have some questions as well, so I'll feed those in, or we'll cover some questions at the end as we come to it. In terms of kind of AI more generally, so you've mentioned there sort of weaving that in and how that would work. How about people? Is this eliminating jobs within this area, within the companies you work, replacing people with AI? Where do we feel we are with that?
Well, I'll unmute there. So I guess so. There's a number of points on this, right? And this is about the future of work. So, I mean, essentially, there's a lot of talk about agentic AI, about decision intelligence and other kind of fields that you know are really changing the way that people do work in the future. And this is affecting, you know, the people on the ground. So it's affecting your warehouse operators, your materials managers, your production planners. And essentially what we're trying to get to is we can now progress this a lot faster than we previously could. So with the development of things like agentic AI and decision intelligence, practitioners in supply chain can genuinely focus on the 20% of activities that are going to make a real difference for the organization, and allow the technology to manage the rest of the 80%, just picking a percentage at random, that are sort of standard transactional activities, right? And there's the concept of the sort of the human in the loop, the human on the loop, the human out of the loop, that is sort of enabling organizations to allow tech to make real-time decisions across those different areas of the business, like materials management, like, you know, production, fulfillment, transportation, in a kind of safe and trusted way that people within the business, you know, believe in the technology to make the right decision. So by starting with human on the loop and kind of transitioning to human out of the loop, the organization can transition with confidence to automation. But I think we touched on it a bit previously. It means that the role of, for example, your planner or your transport manager is going to be changing potentially significantly as a result, and it requires, you know, the right skills, the right capabilities to work on those more complex sort of value add tasks. It's not about replacing the individual, it's about getting the individual to do the sort of the more value add work for the business, whilst the tech does the rest of it. So yeah, it's not replacing, it's really, hopefully it's making the work more interesting, more stimulating for the individual, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Neil.
Just to jump in there, Ollie, just to build on Neil's point, because it's like, I don't know who's on this call and the age profile. We'll go back to, if I go back to the time of like Tomorrow's World, when we were all teenagers, you know, they used to say that the robots were going to take all of our jobs, you know, and I always remember that. I always remember feeling the pressure associated with that as a kid. You know, if you transform that to today and you sit here and have this conversation, as Neil just pointed it out, you know, is AI going to take my job? Or planners? You know, I think the reality is, the key message for people is, no, it's not. But someone who knows how to work with AI will.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real transition piece there, a real key message. I think that's why when we talk about effective transformation, that's a key part of the collaboration of how all parts of our business will be part of delivering a successful transformation. And that's the kind of human aspect, the HR, the L&D piece.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to jump in and
no, I was also, I mean, it's a great discussion, and it also, I think, links really well into the change management, because although we're talking about this at sort of quite a strategic level of how roles will change, don't underestimate, as you start to embark on this transformation and you start talking about some digitization or automation within your supply chain, the way that the organization, particularly at the more junior levels, will be thinking about this and some of the threats. And as a result of that, they may not be explicitly said, but they will influence behaviours and potentially the way that ultimately the transition is successfully or unsuccessfully integrated into the new ways of how people will be working.
And just feeding in a question here. So, just taking you back to an earlier question, got a question from Nilesh around, I think, vendor selection. So what insights can you share on how you define requirements in an RFI to assess cultural fit?
So you don't, let's just clarify, you're not going to assess the cultural fit in the RFI. The RFI is about, so, you take in 15 vendors into the RFI, you clearly define your business requirements, and you then down select from like 10 to 15 down to 3 to 4, for example. And it's at that stage that you then start to think about cultural fit. But critical critical for making sure that you make the right decision is that you need to understand how effectively or how well the various different providers are kind of experienced within your sector, within your industry, within your geography, both from a delivery, support and implementation point of view, and also what's their kind of approach for deploying at the pace and the speed that you want to deploy at. So go and talk to existing customers. Many vendors offer, go and visit customer A, who's obviously going to be a superb advocate, but you can actually still talk to people who, have been there and done it in detail and understand, the good, the bad and the ugly of working with some of these people, and what to watch out for. So you can really start by having these conversations with existing customers. You can really start to kind of get under the skin of what it's like to work with this organization. So in summary, check first of all hygiene factors around how effectively they work with your technology, your industry and your geographies, and then what's their approach to deployment and what's their approach to working with organizations, and what works well and what doesn't work well with this organization. It's really critical to understand that before you embark on the journey, because it's you're going to be with them for a number of years, either through implementation or into steady state running, so you want to get it right to start with.
And Mike, Dewey, in your experience in terms of kind of key enablers for a successful digital transformation, what would you say are they?
Sure, yeah. So within Mile 20, we've developed a framework on how to think about this through many years now of collected experience, and that framework has 4 pillars. The first pillar is technology enablement. The second one is digital master planning. The third one is change management, and the fourth one is technology foundations. So if I sort of just quickly drill onto each of those, some have already been captured during the discussion today, but technology enablement is 2 things. One is around making sure that you focus on your problem rather than the technology in terms of defining the scope of what you're going to achieve. The second part is, again, what was touched on earlier, is ensuring that the technology change is part of a wider transformation that all supports every element of ensuring that the technology change is finally embedded in the new ways of working as they were imagined. Digital master plan is an interesting one. I mean, this may be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. You will never achieve what you always put in your 5th or your 3rd or even sometimes your 1 year, but having that roadmap and ensuring that within supply chains fitting within the wider business, it just ensures that the investments and the decisions and the journey that you're taking is ultimately going to be in a way that reduces the number of regrets as you go through. So for example, if you are going to be going through a huge ERP platform change, you also need to think about, if you haven't done already, your planning implementation, so that ultimately if those two can be intercepted, the decision on how those both are solved in terms of provider and setup, whether they're integrated, whether it's two separate solutions, is made as one rather than as two. And then the other part is within that journey map, don't underestimate, and we'll come to that in a second, the foundations that are needed to successfully implement a digital transformation. Sometimes the less glamorous part that Neil referred to in terms of like master data. And it's not just about a one-time cleanup. Do you have the capabilities to make sure that you've got the governance and the processes for ensuring that that is really in tip-top continual condition? Because many of the manual processes that we, within organizations are often using today are sometimes supported by individuals managing around poor data, which our systems often, even with the greatest AI, are not always able to be so forgiving. And then the foundations are really around three key pillars. One is around capability, making sure with this change you've got the right organization and the right skills to be able to support that. The other area is with the processes and ensuring that you've got the right, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of like the master data setup. And then finally, it's around change management, which I'm not going to say anything more on, but with such a change management really has to be supercharged to a really high degree of excellence to ensure that you buck out of this 70% risk in terms of transformation not hitting your original expected business case outcome.
And obviously all of you combine obviously sort of best practice from an external consulting perspective, but equally warts and all from actually in the industry, in businesses before, in terms of you providing that kind of advice and leadership for those clients. I think that's really useful to sort of know that you've kind of been there and seen it and done it, good and bad, over a number of years as well. And I guess the sort of final question is around leadership. And Mike, just in terms of how important leadership of this transformation within this area is to sort of drive success.
Yeah, so listen, I'm going to focus in on the transformation leadership itself as opposed to the leadership of the business. So I've talked about that throughout the various other questions I've answered. And in answering this question, it's contextual. It's contextual to the complexity of the project, whether it's a pointed solution or a full transformation roadmap. But equally, it's contextual to how aligned and organized the business is, the board, with its roadmap of sequenced and prioritized projects and the quality of its key results that it's looking for. Well, let's assume the worst case scenario, and at some point with people on this call, we get a chance to understand their individual context of their individual organization, because it will be different. But a successful transformation leader does three things. They clarify the what and turn it into a how. They take these high-level goals and convert them into actionable steps. They absolutely balance the technology with the change management, something you've heard all three of us talk about extensively. The what, and to make sure this adoption of a solution doesn't stall. A brilliant little phrase that I've heard somewhere, which was a fool with a tool, it's still a fool. This concept of bringing it to life is real. And they also align the business, at the highest level all the way through to the lower levels, the operators. They align its capabilities and the conversion towards a new set of skills. And as Neil talked about, the partnerships. Who are the people that we're going to work with that take what is a pointed moment into a long-term competitive advantage? And a true transformation leader in a complex environment has to work on all of those three things, sit at a helm and deliver all aspects of it. And what I do find, and I can sit here and convert this into an example, and maybe if we have time at the end, I possibly will, to talk about how you build on those objectives and convert them into fine steps. But I guess where I'll pause, mindful of time, is like a final thought, and that is a transformation leader without gravitas within an organization is a project manager, and therefore you'll get what you set off to do. Whereas these transformation programs need to be agile, they need to adjust. There are opportunities that you will find during the process of introducing this that you didn't know were there. And equally, there will be risks and alignment that are required, and the levels of emotional intelligence required to run a project like this in a business where it affects every part of the organization, and getting people to maybe pause. So the phrase pet projects or vanity projects sounds derogatory. It's not. Like, all parts of the business have a desire to improve their elements. Someone in a transformation role helps the organization define what to stop, what to pause, what to resequence in order for the maximum benefit. And yeah, I've seen many different choices made, and I actually believe over the course of the next year or two to see many more organizations investing in permanent transformation functions that are typically the purvey of your FTSE 100, your kind of high complex FTSE 250 businesses, whereas your SMEs tend to hire the solution in to deliver it. I think such is the nature of what's going to play out over the next few years. I genuinely believe a strategic goal for many businesses will be the creation of its own transformation function that will allow it to run these long programs in a standard way, getting the business aligned, all resources set up, and be able to see the journey and see it through to its full realization. Yeah, that's how I would answer that question, Ollie.
And you mentioned the future. So, Mike, Dewey, supply chains, where are they heading in light of the current innovation trends, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, Ollie, changing extremely fast. But the three key dimensions that I would pick out as the things that I see happening really, really fast at the moment. One of them is hyperconnectivity across the end-to-end supply chain and beyond. There's autonomy and there's real time. If I just quickly go on to each one. So hyperconnectivity, this is the opportunity to connect your consumer and beyond your consumer to the data that's effectively influencing their behaviors and their spending and the decisions that they're making, the economic indices through your demand planning and your order management, all the way through to your, say, second or third level supplier, no longer caught up within the cycles of like monthly or quarterly planning. The autonomy is just really through the AI and through some of the capabilities and skills with the complexity of supply chain being so vast. Some of the decisions that are now able through the processing within the support of some of this technology can really help make more optimal decisions that ultimately we as humans would struggle to compute all of the different variables in the best way. And then the final thing is real time. You know, I mentioned around the cycles where sometimes there's such a disconnect between what could be happening in the market to potentially the supplier or the supplier already starting to prepare themselves. And obviously with this ability to move from, for example, a weekly planning cycle to potentially a daily planning cycle, and at some point for that to become real time, it really allows an electric pace of what's needed in the supply chain and the customer right the way through to those that need it. And one sort of interesting example, I was just thinking back this morning of my daughter. She suddenly had a craving to do some art project and buy these, and I've never even seen them before, they're called Blendy pens. And she first went to the shops, local shops, and she couldn't find them there. She started going online, she started ordering. She thought she'd ordered, and then she got a few minutes later a confirmation saying, sorry, the order has been cancelled, we can't provide this. And so I started to get curious and I started asking her more and more about this. And what it ultimately emerged is that she'd seen this Blendy pen through a TikTok feed. And so she, together with probably every other teenager in the UK and beyond, were busily going and purchasing this. And in such a situation, I wonder how quickly the supplier and also the supplier's supplier got notice of this trending that was happening around their requirements, that potentially in the future future, we'll be able to, again, any supply chain would struggle, but we could probably do a much better job than what we're typically able to do today.
And just building on that, in terms of, there's a question here from Leon as well, in terms of when assessing platform providers, how deeply should you be looking at their supply chain? Does that make sense?
So Neil, if you want to take.
Yeah, so I read that question from Leon. So it does make good sense actually. So I think there's a few points to this. So one was around outsourcing of support services and that side of things. So yes, absolutely. It goes back to the point that I was talking about previously. You need to understand to what level the support that's provided is going to meet the needs of your business. Do you mind whether it's outsourced to a third party? What level of service are they going to provide? And how do you lock that into the contracts? And what evidence do you have of other people who have worked with that provider, how effectively that support service has been? So yeah, definitely that's worth researching. It's worth understanding what your KPIs are and your service level agreements are with your provider to make sure that they deliver what you want, and you have to lock it into the contract. The other point was around financial stability in that question as well. And absolutely, yes. So that is a really critical point around. So a lot of these organizations are relatively new. Some of them are PE backed, some of them are like startups. None of them have been around, or not many of them have been around for 15, 20, 25 years. So it's really important to understand how they're backed, how they finance, what's their financial security like. And the market is, as I say earlier, is so volatile, and there are winners and losers in the market. And you need to make sure that you're backing the right one. Otherwise, you could get into difficulties further down the line. And again, that's something that just adds to the minefield of make sure you get your selection process right at the very start. So yeah, great point that from Leon. Thank you.
And is that something you do, Neil? And just in terms of you work in this space a lot, right?
Definitely, yeah. And there's also a kind of a significant procurement angle to that as well. So yeah, we definitely. I mean, I've worked with many organisations over the years to choose vendors, choose the right vendor, and then implement and make sure that what's delivered towards the end, throughout the journey is what's needed. So yeah, we have plenty of experience of doing that over the last, in fact, 25 years. It's already been that long.
A couple of other questions just to drop in. So we covered this at the start in terms of touched on the subject, but a question from Andrea around the kind of life cycle. Implementation of an APS takes potentially up to 5 years. Does this work within that kind of PE window?
Sounds like another one for me, right? So it's a few points on that. It doesn't have to be an APS. You can do many different solutions other than APS that will help to automate and drive efficiency into your supply chain. Looking at how to optimize inventory levels, looking at how to optimize customer service using AI and various different platforms and technologies and point solutions, right? However, if APS is what you need, in fact, actually, it doesn't take 5 years to implement. So Kinaxis, for example, one of the leading providers of APS, you can implement that in like 1 to 2 years, depending on the scope and the scale of the business. But if it's a typical sort of, medium-sized enterprise, then yeah, that's definitely doable within the life cycle of a PE, PE ownership, which could be, minimum 3 years, 3 to 8 years. So absolutely, yes, it is something that is very viable within the PE ownership time horizon, and that's why I kind of called it out right at the start there. So yeah, thanks for the clarifications there.
So we've got 10 minutes to go. There's a question that's been dropped in. You might want to have a quick look at from Oliver. But in terms of sort of kind of key takeaways as well. Mike, either of the mics while Neil's reading that. In terms of your
quite long.
In terms of your sort of key takeaways from this, like we've talked about a huge amount across this topic. For someone who's signed in, who works in this space, what would be your kind of key piece of advice, do you think, for them to take away from this today?
I'll let the younger looking Mike go first.
Wait, which one's that?
You're too
my takeaway is technology is not the transformation, and the business is, and you've heard us, all three of us, say that. There's a lot of common ground in that for anyone who's played in this space before. And before diving in, you got to be crystal clear on why you're doing it and what success looks like in business terms. You got to anchor everything, the business outcomes. You got to align the leadership and recognize the culture change and the changes to the target operating model. Again, someone's question in the chat room there, and you've got to prepare for the change, not the implementation. And all the successful projects that I've been involved in, I've done those. Equally, the ones that I wasn't successful in and cut my teeth in the early days, when you sit back and reflect, you can see where those transformations were set up for failure before we even got going.
Yeah, so great point, Mike. What I would just add is just a very simple concept that I think has run through all of today, which is don't automate as you go through into this, how you work today. Leverage this transformation to reimagine how you could work in a much more effective way through all of the new tools and processes that are now available to you.
And Neil, finally, from you.
I mean, yeah, it's a good question. We need to look into, to be honest, we need to look into that in some more detail to understand really what this regulation, what this guidance is talking about. But does it impact supplier selection? I would say that supplier selection will still need to follow the same rules and the same principles that we talked about earlier on in this. So I would say no, it doesn't have an impact on the selection. I don't know if Mike, you've got a view on that, but I'd say no.
Mm.
And in terms of key takeaways for you, Neil, what kind of leaving people with your key piece of advice to sum up? There's obviously a lot of things covered, a lot of ground covered here.
Yeah, so I guess the key takeaway. So it can seem daunting, all this stuff we talked about, all the pitfalls, all the things to avoid, all the things to get right. Don't let that scare you off. Best piece of advice is start small. Think about how best to scale quickly and focus on where you can get the biggest impact to deliver against the key metrics of your business. So it doesn't have to be a huge project. It doesn't have to be a massive, all-encompassing transformation. Focus on the money and scale fast. That's for me.
So in terms of kind of what we covered today, a lot of ground. We've covered kind of key enablers. We've covered difference between kind of corporate PE settings, vendor selection, technology, people, process, the future of supply chain. We've covered a fair bit of ground. In terms of how you would typically support people, organizations, the reason why we've partnered with Mile 20 or each individually is you offer that sort of flexibility. So, either as independent advisors, either as sort of more of a full-fledged consultancy, but you offer sort of diagnostic assessments, right, in terms of any of these areas. If people on this call, did want to sort of dig into more detail or provide more context around their sort of individual circumstances.
Yeah, listen, absolutely. I think Mile 20, whilst we might be a bit lame at webinars, we don't just sit here and do this all day. When we really get in our sweet spot, we can, define, design, and deliver transformation. And the reason, in fact, why we got together as a trio was recognizing that balance, that blend of how to bring transformation to life. You got Neil there with his years and years of consultancy advice, consultant through and through in many ways, deep expertise, best practice, business insights, and good stuff. You got Mike and I combined 50 years worth of leading operations and transformations in the real world. Most of those 50 years sit with Mike, of course. But we understand the realities of execution. I've done it brilliantly a few times, average quite a few times, and poor a few times. But we know how to make change stick. So yeah, I think we break it down into two elements. We can offer strategy guidance. We can sit and work with organizations and help you lay the right foundations with maturity assessments, ideation workshops, helping you devise the best use cases, to Neil's point, how to start early, get some quick wins and build that into a broader plan. Making sure those initiatives align with the operational goals or where your organization is actually going, finding the right tools in the right time in the right place. Or we offer the end-to-end execution. And it's something that, you know, all three of us have done multiple times for multiple different clients, from building the milestone roadmap to setting up the governance, the vendor selection, the cultural adaptation, the target operating model, and all of the elements that we've talked long and hard about how to make it work at an organizational level. And yeah, that's what we bring.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your input. Thank you to everyone for signing in and staying with us today for the best part of an hour. If we will write up the content that we will talk today, and we will ensure that everyone has a copy of that. But in terms of engaging the team or anyone from the team, feel free to connect directly, or equally reach out to myself or anyone at the Barton Partnership, and we'll put you in touch. But I really thank you, a big thank you to the panel, interesting discussion, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.